Okay. Hi, everybody, and welcome to our guest speaker presentation from Bryn Davies, who's going to be talking about level design. Um, so I guess before I start doing, um, let's see, before I start doing, or let Bryn do his thing, just a quick little intro. So Bryn's been coming by our classes for a long time. I can't remember when the first time was, but I feel like it was about like 7 or 8 years ago. And so he was at the time as part of the Ubisoft team. And yeah, he would come by and talk to our class about level design. And since then, I mean, I've had the pleasure of being able to hear this talk and also see how it's grown over the years. And while I could tell you some of the things that he's going to talk about, the major difference between me telling you these things and Bryn telling you about these things is that I would just be parroting the things he says. But where Bryn says it, it comes from a place of experience, right? And so this is part of the reason why we love having Bryn come by and actually talk to you, is because, you could read these things or, look up these things, but when you're getting at what you're going to get is sort of not just the content, but also the perspective, the understanding of how this stuff works in the world. So while this is going on, please put questions into the chat. Anything where the stuff that he's mentioning kind of makes you think about something or makes you wonder something, toss it in, because half of this presentation is going to be the things that Brent shows you, but half of it is going to be like things that there's like ideas or thoughts this provokes in you. And at the end, we usually have a little bit of time for you to be asking questions that are specific to your games about like, how do I handle this situation? How do I put it again? What kind of considerations do I need to make for a level about this? And so, yeah, we want this to be partly just like going over some of the ideas, but also a bit of a dialogue, so that you can ask things that are coming to mind. Okay. All right,
Yeah.
with that in mind, I'm going to leave things to Bryn to take from here.
Thanks very much, Steve. Yeah, I just append onto that as well. If there's like something very much comes to mind, question that you want to ask in the moment, please do like stick your hand up or something like that, or obviously post it in the chat. Because I know if you typically wait to the end and it's like, oh, that bit of slide is gone or something.
Hmm.
So I'm okay to break this up if you want to just be like, oh, what about this thing? Some stuff might end up getting answered later anyway, but you never know.
Yeah, I'm going to put in little comments here and there too, right? So
Yeah,
don't
yeah,
feel
go for
don't feel shy about you guys
it.
doing the same thing as me.
Great. So, yeah, hey folks. My name is Bryn Davis. I'm technical level design director at People Can Fly. And oh, thank you very much. So, my lunch has just arrived, but it will sit tentatively off to the side. What are we talking about today? Well, here's a quick summary of what we'll be going over today. Be a little introduction, talk about what levels are, the level design process, a kind of overview of that, what is good level design, and then go over some theory and stuff at the end. So a little bit about myself. I used to work at Lionhead Studios back in the UK, where I spent about 7 years working on lots of games with Fable in the name of them. Fable Legends, rest in peace. Then I moved to Canada to work at Ubisoft Toronto, where I worked for. This says 8 years. I'm pretty sure it's closer to 10 now. Actually, this intro slide keeps evolving each year. Yeah, I shipped Watch Dogs 2, Starlink Battle for Atlas, and Watch Dogs Legion. I left Ubisoft. Say now it's been about 2.5 years, coming up to now, and went to People Can Fly, and I am now working on something cool and totally top secret, which I cannot talk about, on pain of death slash NDA. You know how it goes. Yeah, this slide reminds me every year of how long I've been in the industry. I keep forgetting, you just forget how many years tick by now. It's crazy. I think it's 17, but I think it's no, I think it was 17 last year, so it must be 18 now. Yeah, coming up to 20. This will be fun. So first off, what exactly is a level? I groan every time that I ask this question in this slide, but it does bear thinking about because the moment you start digging into this, the moment that you start realizing that all levels are really different from each other, right? I mean, some levels they might be crafted to tell a story. It's a single player mission. You go and you do this thing. Other levels, there's no narrative, as it has no other sort of narrative content other than that which the players themselves make. One level might be different every single time you play through it. Others might be explicitly exactly the same. And then, everything we looked at before are all environments and stuff, but levels can obviously be a lot more esoteric structures than that. They could be missions, stories, challenges, sequences. Obviously puzzle games come to mind with this, but think about strategy games and things like that as well. It really kind of breaks down what you think a level might be. If I had to sum it up with some fancy in a kind of snappy little way with a single sentence, then a level is the structure through which the player interacts with the game's content. It's the glue, right? It's the wrapper. It binds the mechanics that we use and the elements that we can interact with into a cohesive whole. It's intentional. And that is, it's specifically designed to communicate a given idea to the player. To kind of go over that a bit more, like the most traditional sense of the word, if we take our mechanics, the tools with which the player can interact with the game, and the things that we can interact with, and then we arrange these in such a way as to convey specific design intent, then we get a level. Level design and its counterpart level art are the two disciplines most closely tied to creating levels in games. Level design is predominantly focuses on the functional aspects of how the level's going to play. Like, what can the player do? What are you trying to communicate to them as a designer? Level art then aims to ensure that the space is fully realized through asset production, lighting, particles, all that kind of stuff. And I know I just said like, okay, well, level design does this and level art does that, and never the twain shall meet. But in reality, though, they both overlap in their concerns. And depending on the size of the studio, the responsibilities of both spheres might be covered by one person or many people. Case in point, when I was a level designer at Lionhead, level designers did their own prettying, i.e., they did the art pass. Sometimes they do the lighting pass and such as well. So even on a smaller team, you don't have the headcount for people to go off and be specialists in these sorts of things. So let's look at the level design process. Well, how do you even start designing a level? If I come back to the previous statement that I had, right, of what levels are, level is the structure through which the player interacts with the game's content. It seems that there's three things that we need to know before we can start designing a level. First one is, what is the player? And it's not just the person behind the controls, it's their particular agency inside our game, be it a character, a camera, etc. We'll dig into those in a moment. How do they interact with the game? Like, what are the game's mechanics? And then, what do I interact with? Like, what is the game made up of? What do I put in my level? These are three things that, from your perspectives, you've already answered in part through your creative briefs. So with that in mind, I'm going to jump into mine. Hold on to your seats because Bryn's designing a crazy game. So here's my completely, entirely original third-person action RPG that I threw together. Oh God, when was this? I brought up every year. This is called Steel of Honor. Um, the monstrous hordes of Graxum Lamulus, the unpronounceable, have returned to ravage the lands of Generica, and only one hero can bring peace to the land with their steel, which clearly is honorable in this case. Um, I talk a little bit. I don't need to read you all the text here, but it's a third-person action RPG. There's going to be combat. There's going to be monsters to fight. There'll be some RPG progression mechanics. There'll be skill trees. Oh, how there'll be skill trees. You can interact with NPCs, obviously. You can develop relationships, maybe. You can choose your own story. Maybe there'll be a variety of relationship quests. How can one person build this entire game on their own? You'll find out. And obviously, different play styles and things like that. The important thing I want to state actually here is that level design wise, I'm thinking more of kind of a linear or sort of like bubbled content, right? Like areas in which it's not completely open world. There's going to be some constraints to where I run about in my level. So less Skyrim and Breath of the Wild and stuff like that, and a lot more, say, Dragon Age did a lot of this, or God of War, or lots of other games that have these kind of maybe still large feeling areas, but you're gated between which ones you load into and such. And the reason we're going to do that, by the way, is just that open world level design is a bit of a different approach. It's a bit of its own beast, and you're probably not designing open world games. So we're going to focus on the latter. All right, so to start with, and to keep things simple, I'm going to focus on what's usually referred to in AAA development as 3Cs. It's a very widely known term now. But when I first heard 3Cs, I was like, what's that? 3C stands for character, camera, and controller. They are the three elements that how the player feels the experience of piloting their avatar in the game. And in this instance, we're talking about a third person game. Could also be a first person, could also be relating to other types of games. But you predominantly, there's a lot more sort of parts to third or first because we've got a thing that we're interacting with and we have a whole camera system and everything else that's going to get us feeling like that character. I'm using the beautiful UE5 mannequin for my player character because I don't need to design a player character of my own just yet. I'm going to be able to walk and run for now. Should be easy enough. We don't need to go into crazy mechanics just yet. And my character and controls should be very familiar to anyone who's ever played a third person game before. That is to say, like at a high level, it's going to be a string and cage. This is a very old school concept of how cameras work. In reality, we can split hairs for days about specific camera types between different games within the third person space. We can get very, very noodly, but we don't need to do that just yet. I've got a rough idea then of a direction that I want to take, right? But I don't actually have enough information to start making an actual level for my game. See, the specifics of my 3Cs, like how big my character is, how fast or slow they are, how my camera's going to move, like where it's all going to sit in relation to the character. These are all foundational parts of my game that many other systems, features, and content are going to rely on. Um, and this diagram, it's really not like I'm not saying that it's purely this pyramid structure or anything else. Actually, there's a lot of interdependence between how these things are connected together instead of this linear hierarchy. And this isn't exhaustive either. But the example being that 3Cs are low level enough to be critical components. And if I change them later on, it's going to fundamentally impact a lot of other things, especially level design. And I mean, as I talk about here, right? Like how long it takes to travel anywhere in the game, perception of AI, whether I can perceive AI. Can AI perceive me before I can perceive them? Do they attack me and it feels unfair? That can affect the balance of the game. All these sorts of things feed into like, oh, maybe I shouldn't have made my character that big, or maybe my character should have moved faster. Uh, so the point we get into here is the environment, the level is designed specifically for my character to move in. I mean, that's the only reason that it exists, right? It's a level for my game. And so my character scale is paramount to the environment's layout, navigation, and the relative scale to it. A lot of other aspects of our games design, including the readability of like what is content, like can I interact with that, or is that just something in the background? But also things like the tuning of physics, spatialized audio. We can be here for days. This is all dependent on a character scale. I have two different examples here about, just using the default capsule height and then seeing what happens when I don't have that. And it's just horribly frustrating to think of this environment on the right is clearly not built with this character in mind. And I don't mean, sorry, that you can't have a game with a big character. That's not it. It's that this is clearly not a space that this character can move into. So is it something that I'm supposed to be moving into? Um, all things that you have to think about here. Player movement speed. Just even movement speed is such a simple one that I love coming back to because it's a critical component that underpins our environment design, right? This is exactly the same space with different speeds, and it can feel very different to each other. Is my level too small or too big? Um, and you might go, okay, well, Brent, clearly that's too fast. You should make your character slower. But then you think about a game that has vehicles, mounts or horses or something like that in it. Um, and I say in most cases, those levels that have those abilities in them are designed knowing that that would be in the game. You don't shoehorn such a big design change in after your levels are already built. You can do, but then that leads to reworking the level, right? And if you don't rework the level, if you don't try and adjust for these mechanics changes, then you get a place where, oh, the three C's feel crappy. Oh, this sucks. I'm, always getting snagged on things as I'm going through this area.
I remember actually I went to a GDC talk where they actually just showed the same racing game, but they changed the field of view. And then they
Oh,
showed like
yeah.
one of them looks so boring. They almost like, you're just like in almost like a GTA thing where you're just kind of maneuvering around different objects. And the other one was like fast paced, like you're kind of zooming through this thing on a rocket. And it was the
I'm
same.
glad that you mentioned field of view because it is literally on this slide as well.
Wow, look at this.
Uh,
Almost like I'd seen
yeah,
it.
it's huge. Field of view affects so much in the perception of as you say, the perception of speed, right? Is one, and then it's not just really when if you want to start taking a critical look of how cameras work in third-person games, most of the time you find that the field of view is not static. It's modal and it changes all over the place.
Actually, could you explain quickly what the camera boom and field of view are?
Oh yeah, sure. So yeah, the field of view is like the angle of kind of view that the camera has of your space, right? So field of view, like 75 degrees. That's kind of like that's how wide it views outwards to. Coming all the way out to, I mean, you could do like 180 degrees or something like that. Um, the Based on how wide or shallow your field of view is, you're going to have a very different kind of, well, you can see the exact same space running through that exact same space feels very different. The amount of that you can see on the, either sides of you here, also the perception of speed, right? The character is moving at the exact same speed in all of those cameras. So you can see it has a very big impact on the perception of the same space. And it might mean you might go, oh no, I feel like I'm moving too fast in the bottom one, right? Um, but you want that field of view. So you might then have to change your environment so that your environment doesn't lead to the perception that you don't want to have, right? With camera boom, so talk about a camera has a stringing cage. A typical, well, actually, yeah, in Unreal they have like a spring arm. I think in what is it in Unity? There's probably a similar sort of setup. I'm not familiar with like typical Unity camera setups and things like that. But either way, it's usually going to be something that you can have the option of having. Should your camera collide with things? Like, should your camera adjust to, not be to not allow the player to be obscured? And that impacts a lot of like the perception of, well, should the camera collide with these things or not? And that can be variable within a level. And if it doesn't, or it does, it has big impacts on how that level feels and the feeling of being your character in there. Um, also mention actually just for mentioning on if you have an isometric camera, like are do you allow the player to be obscured by geometry? And that's not just a question of like there are many solutions to that problem, right? I could design a level where you cannot get into that area where the you would be obscured, right? I could put like blocking volumes down or something that would stop the character getting there. Some games do that. Some games will occlude the geometry, right? They'll fade it out. Some geometry might not get faded out. Um, and others might do things like adjusting the camera so that that doesn't happen or whatever. Again, or actually, some will build the level so that there are no bits of geometry to get occluded on. That's many other games do that. But it's things that then, as you see, that decision impacts how you're going to build that level. And so these all need considering before you even get to the point of building what your level's going to look like. So these sorts of fundamental design choices and the data you sort of accrue by making them are commonly called metrics. They are the rules by which we can begin to build other systems on top of. They can and will change. Right? That's the nature of iterative design. But the greater the change and the more dependent the game's mechanics are on those metrics, the more knock-ons you have to deal with, which means the more kind of other changes you might have to make. If you built a bunch of levels, you might have to change all of those levels. You have to rework them. The example here as well, I'm just giving I built a sort of, let's say, human scale space. And once you start looking at trying to replicate human-like spaces and trying to obey metrics around them, as you've played hundreds of games where there are humans in them and there are human-like spaces. You can see that they all vary very, very much in terms of how much, well, how not real they are in terms of the size of things, right? The difficulty here is not just my character needs to be able to go inside the house and walk around and interact with things, but also it needs to look like a house. Because if it doesn't look like a house, or it doesn't look like a city, or it doesn't look like a car, or all those kinds of things, then it's going to look really weird. And then people are going to be like, that looks wrong. So you've got these competing needs that are going to impact your metrics there. And it's a difficult thing to have to sort of sort out. So tuning these metrics, and iterating on mechanics that are going to decide these metrics is best done in a space where you can focus on that feature exclusively and where the environment is built to test the extents of what you can do. Typically, these are referred to as gyms. You might have one for all of your movement mechanics, another one for combat, for AI, another one for the conversation system. Um, but designers and artists also might build gyms to test out and iterate on their own ideas, maybe like a boss battle or some cool environment idea or a puzzle or something like that, right? To prove out those design assumptions so that this content could later be used in part of a larger level. I just every time I look at the jump height one, it's so frustrating because, and it highlights a really important thing if you get to the middle step that I can't quite jump onto. And it's that it looks like I should be able to reach that step, but I can't. So as a player, I have no idea if I saw a step like that, if I could make it without trying it. And that's terrible because I should be able to read that something is reachable. That something like, oh, I can jump up on there and I should be able to go that way. Um, so metrics can be important also to try and indicate like, what can't you do, right? What is not content? Um, but yeah, it's frustrating. And things like this make themselves into games all the time. So it's important to get your three C's metrics, I say about 80% of the way, right? And by that, I mean like just getting the fundamentals down 80% of the way, just so that you know that any big changes to that 80% are going to have knock-ons further down the line. You might have to change skills, you might have to change levels, AI perception, all that kind of stuff. Use metrics to inform other design choices, like restricting the height of objects so that your jump height can be interpreted by the player. And really always design with the player in mind, right? You fit the world to the player's metrics, not the other way around. You want to account for the player making a mistake. And you don't want to mislead the player unintentionally, like having an explorable play space, right, that doesn't actually have any reason to exist. Or similarly, as we said before, right, like having something that looks like it should be interactable, but it isn't, or the other way around. Um, okay, so I mean, let's say we've iterated, we've done a bunch of work. I'm happy with my three C's. We've got some mechanics. We've got some things that we can interact with, some actors. You don't need everything, right? You can, if as long as you got something to go on. I know what I'm going to do in a level. I know what the player could be doing. Then we're ready to jump into writing a pitch, and we can go further through this whole level design process. So for a pitch, like what basically we're saying, what is the space like, right? What do we do here? Why does it exist? Now, I've given myself the direction that I'm coming up with. I'm going to do an optional sort of side quest area for Steel of Honor. And so we're going to launch into this pitch. And unfortunately, I'm pitching to myself because it's a solo project, and I don't even know why I'm pitching to you because I can do whatever I want. It's my project. But here goes. Hopefully, my voice will hang out on this. Uh, on the edge of the kingdom's borders, the hero comes across a witch living in the woods. Her cat has gone missing, and she appeals to the hero to help find it. A band of trolls has moved into the ruins of an old fortress on the nearby cliffs, and she fears that they may have taken it. The hero ventures along an old road that runs along the coastline, working their way up towards the ruins that overlook the area. They make their way into the ruins, now refortified by the trolls. They can hear the cat meowing. It must be close. Finally, the hero finds the cat. But to their surprise, the trolls taking great care of it, and the cat seems pretty happy in its new home. So here, the hero can choose to do the heroic thing and murder the evil trolls and then return the cat to its rightful owner. Or side with the trolls and convince the witch that you were too late to save the cat. If the cat is returned to the witch, she thanks the hero profusely, then proceeds to kill the cat and prepare it for her dinner. So this was a bout of madness that I wrote several years ago. And I stuck myself to doing, I am only going to write the first thing that comes to mind. So we did this. There's some rather unoriginal tropes in here. And it literally was the first idea that popped into my head when I was writing this talk. But no, we're going to take this further. Let's look at breaking this down, the main elements that this is made up of, and see how do we take this idea, this stream of consciousness out of my head, into a level. So here I break down some of the main elements from the pitch. These are things that are going to need further investigation by various departments, right? But it also should be informing my level design. We talk about the edge of the kingdom's borders. It's wild, it's secluded, it's undeveloped land. It is evocative. I can see the imagery that might come up from this. We've got this idea of a witch living in the woods. Okay, well, what's a witch's home like? And also, she lives in the woods. So how does she influence the landscape around her? We've mentioned this cat that we must rescue. And the witch has a cat. We need to understand that from her home, from the environment around there. It should be quite clear that she is a cat owner. There is a band of trolls, it's refortified by the trolls. We're talking about trolls a lot. Okay, well, like, what are trolls like? How do they affect the landscape? Um, how is the ruin now designed to be used by the trolls? If they've taken it over, what changes have they made to make it suitable for trolls? Also, this was a ruin of an old fortress. Well, like, how old? Who built it? Like, what was it? Why was it here before? Lots of questions that we can answer. We talk about this nearby cliffs. There's this old road that runs along the coastline, looks over the area. Again, very evocative of the type of landscape. There's a lot of thematic progression that we can imagine that sort of take us through this level. Um, and then we've got the sort of the twist at the end, right? That actually the trolls are taking great care of the cat. Cat seems happy. Obviously, it's an important sort of juxtaposition to the initial vibe of the quest. So that means that we need to build tension towards it. Otherwise, we're not going to get that payoff. But then also, how can the player understand how well the trolls are taking care of the cat? That needs to be well understood. Otherwise, we miss the payoff too. All right, so with all of these elements now in my mind, these are things that we need to explore. We can do some reference gathering. And this is done for a number of reasons. So one, we have to kind of understand and utilize the shape language of a particular reference. If I'm going to design a ruin on a clifftop hill overlooking a forest on the coastline, I need to understand the rules by which those shapes kind of influence those spaces, right? They all follow particular rules, be it natural rules or rules about how people build, structures and things like that. I need to learn how to connect each of these parts together, not just naturally, but also logically, right? This needs to be realized as a believable logical whole and not just a series of disconnected moments in this level. And then I need to fill in pieces, the sort of missing piece, I'd say, with external ideas, also generate new ideas from specific references. So, a classic is like, oh, I come across something that looks really cool, that kind of heavily influences the direction that the 3D blockout's going to take afterwards. Um, Lots of people do reference gathering, concept artists and level artists and things will do that. But also, I feel like level designers always should use references too, even if they're just going to be doing the kind of the logical breakdown, because you need to learn how these rules are going to piece together. So I comb through lots of image search and I pull out references that I like, pictures from people and things like that. I recommend actually Google image search is pretty bad. Bing is actually really good. However, back in the day, prior to the AI breakthrough, it was a lot easier to do this. And now with AI generated images, they tend to clog up a lot of search for reference and things like that. It gets a lot more difficult to do this now. But hopefully there's some tips and tricks you can do to like exclude AI generated images or particular domains from your resulting image search. And so I started going through reference. These are like the kind of ruins and coastline and things. The castle is Dunluce Castle in Ireland. Also got Corfe Castle in there. There's a Golden Cap, and there's other parts of the Jurassic Coast, which is in Dorset. You might see a lot of my references for this area tend to come from the British Isles and the United Kingdom in general. Very particular, actually. I mean, this was a point of influence for the Fable games. We never tended to kind of draw strong influences from North American kind of environments because they're very different. They have a very different feel to them. Skyrim and things like that, completely, well within the right to do that. It's very grand and epic. These things are very smaller scale, very kind of cozy feeling. Same deal as well when we have these woods that we're looking at here as well. Yeah, trolls and cats are one of the top UK exports. That's true. Many trolls. It's a very European thing being a troll, I guess. So the woods here are actually in Dorset as well. The Witch's Cottage is actually a little cottage that's in Bristol. But I thought it looked kind of neat, and I like some of the language that's on there. How just seeing like the little things about how the wood is on there. I wouldn't necessarily have a metal roof on there, but I like the kind of gnarly looking feel of that. So I'll probably go and riff on that. So I got a lot of ideas here. That's cool, but now I need to plan out the environment, right? I need to know like where things go in relation to each other. This can be done a number of ways, and it's important to keep in mind the reasons why we're doing this. Right? We can put a broad overview of our design on paper, and we can help communicate it to other stakeholders easily. I say stakeholders being like, if I'm the level designer, maybe there's someone who's in charge of the art. Maybe there's other people who have stakes in this that I need to convince, hey, we should build this level. This is a way I can communicate this to them. But also putting a plan together can help prove out the sort of the how the level should flow, right? It's a way of me testing my ideas out before we've even tried to build them and identifying whether there's anything missing. Traditionally, a lot of people do 2D maps. I've done 2D maps in the past. I've done a variety of different 2D mapping techniques and things that people have done. I've got two examples here, one from Dark Souls and one from Dark Souls 3 and one from Valorant. Now some level designers and design teams are very, focused on we should build 2D maps and they build them in this way. Quite often they'll do a bunch of 2D maps as part of the planning stage. But also nowadays, it's actually more common to have other forms of illustration instead. Because the two maps are provided here are quite misleading. These were both produced after the level has actually already been completed. Same with a lot of the maps that I've built. We ended up having to create the 2D maps for the mini map or for, there's going to be a guide that tells you where all the secrets are. And so we need to publish a map. These are then built with the idea of teaching players about the layout of the final level. The prevalence of 2D maps in this setting, though, reinforces this idea that a level designer should be able to sketch out in 2D their idea with a high degree of planning and accuracy. Now, personally, when I've reviewed people's 2D level design plans, it's more an exercise in demonstrating whether or not the designer has thought how they'll fill their space. And it's not about the kind of the nitpicking of the accuracy and the finer detail. That's completely ignored. one of my preferences that I've enjoyed using previous times, and I think can be quite effective, but depends how you kind of fit these things together, is by having a flow map. So here I have put together a rough flow of how the landscape and its themes change as you move through the space. And I've used some of my references to hopefully convey the kinds of visuals I'm going to build. Of course, not every level design has such autonomy. Sometimes I might be starting with a piece of concept art where I might be building a design space around a visual that an artist has already established. Similarly, once I start getting this plan into 3D and we start actually blocking this out, we might get a concept artist to paint over what's been put together to further develop the visual style of the rough block out. Again, like the production flow of how this works varies from level to level and from project to project. So what I'm showing you here is not like the be all and end all of how you design a level. You find what works for your team. And the nice thing is I can also visualize the quest's flow, right, and the decision points and its logic. So here I've mapped out this kind of the main beats of the quest. And I could have even overlaid the flow map from the previous page onto it so you can see how the quest progresses as we move through the environment. So this quest primarily involves, we go and we speak to the witch, we head through the ruins, we confront the trolls. We've got the reveal of this twist. The player has the decision of what way they try and side with either party, and then the quest splits into two resolutions with separate resolutions for each branch. Um, just as an aside, you can find all these sorts of flow diagrams throughout the industry. It's a very common place for mission design, but you'll find them used spatially as well. Uh, I it's unfortunate turn of recent events. Blocktober hashtag Blocktober is usually a very kind of popular thing to find on Twitter. Um, Now, of course, a lot of people tended to not be on that platform anymore. Blocktober still happens, and you will find it, I guess, depending on where people are posting their own kind of blockouts and such. You'll find it now referenced in other parts. I just found out recently, actually, that 80 Live, I don't know how it's supposed to be pronounced, 80.lv, they do a lot of reposting of things, so you can go onto there and see, like they'll grab sort of popular Blocktober posts. Um, and I should say, what is Blocktober? So Blocktober is during October, a lot of level designers across the industry will share blockouts and planning documents, and you get to see it's kind of neat. Like I love seeing the levels that you've already played through that do this, because you get to see famous levels as they looked earlier on in production. Gives you a real insight as to like, well, what people are looking at during AAA game development for a lot of the time there, and that it doesn't look like the final level for a long time. The tweet I've got here is from Dana Nightingale. I believe she's still campaign director at Arcane Leon. I should double check that one. But this was when she was working on Dishonored 2. This is the absolute like masterclass that is the Clockwork Mansion from Dishonored 2. If you haven't played that level, you should go and take a look. It's really, it's so nice. It's just a tasty little morsel of crazy design madness that's in there. But it's pretty awesome. We'll be seeing more of this later on. Uh, so yeah, I guess we should, now that we have this plan, and I should say, I mean, I've not had to get sign off from anyone about this block out, so my plan's just going to go ahead now. We can start to begin the process of building our level in 3D, right? We're going to start by getting the high level pieces from our plan into the environment and put together in 3D. Now, I mean, this is kind of typically called blockout, or grey box, or white box, or something along those lines. Everything in this is going to be completely simple. Because the reason is all we need to communicate is the silhouettes of our intentions. We need to get an idea of the size of the space and how the pieces fit together. You can still use color, and color can be used to highlight either like functionally different objects or surfaces, or getting the correct impression of what something, making it readable as the type of material it might be later on. But we're going to be avoiding using like detailed textures or anything for now. So I jumped into Unreal, threw this together, and it's pretty rough. I just started trying to get the idea of where these important pieces of my level are going to go and get down like where the main elements sit in relation to each other. Now remember, like since we know how fast our character moves, we can estimate how long it's going to take for the player to go from area to area, which means that also any content, like, I'm going to have some combat or something like that, is obviously going to slow them down. But it means that I can start to estimate the amount of time it's going to take to complete this level. How long of game time are we talking about? How does this all fit together? Also, you see, I use block colors for everything, but you also see that I are going to be using checkerboard on the landscape. And the reason that you will use a grid texture or something is to get that perception of speed and change as you move through an environment. Because if you just have a block color, you're not going to be able to see, if there's not a lot in the level, you're not going to get the correct perception of how fast you're moving through that space. All these things affect each other very much. One of the first things that I like to do is I measure the distance between core areas. And here I'm attempting to kind of replicate how the landscape slopes down and then rises back up to the far hill, thinking about how that's going to affect how all these different pieces fit into here. This valley creates an interesting composition artistically. The climb back up towards the ruins that are looming over the top of you should help tonally as well as we build towards the tension of that narrative twist, right? We want this thing looming over you. It's going to feel very imposing. I should say as well, this idea of coming out of the forest, the closeness of the trees, you're going to get a much faster sense of movement as due to the parallax of those objects moving past you. And as it opens up onto the coastal road, the perception of that gets to slow down as the actual environment opens up. This is all actually parts of a thing called circulation, which we're going to talk about later on. That's the perception of speed moving through space and how different spaces can affect the feeling, even in human spaces and architecture and such. Now, one of the benefits, this is a classic thing, a classic trick that you see level designers using all over the place at that. Whenever I get to constrain the path that the player could take, I get the ability to frame the composition of their camera, right? I can have a good idea as to what direction they're looking in, what direction they're heading in, and therefore I can compose a moment of how everything is going to fit together. And so then typically like level designers and level artists and such, they're going to work from multiple vantages like this to compose each shot based on how it's going to be experienced as the player runs through it. The closest of either side this path, we've obviously got that amplification of speed. But then also we're going to have, because of the composition with the hills, as they're sort of nested on top of each other, that you see that distance hill is going to move due to there's this distance between those two, these like different parallax layers. They're going to start to shift as I run towards it, which is going to create a very pleasing experience for the player as they do that. It's like a classic sort of compositional technique. You can sit for days and play with this stuff, but you'll see as you start to nitpick on other people's levels, they do this sorts of things all the time. Okay, so I start building these things out, right? I start to put things down. I get an idea of the kinds of spaces that are going to be here in this level, and I can build on this as I go along. And I start to put this overlaid on this flow diagram that we had earlier on, and start to understand where things might go. Now, things are far from done, miles from done. I could spend, I could spend months breaking this down further and seeing how all of this fits together. Every single segment needs breaking down further, especially the forest area. The forest area is the worst. It needs a lot of work. The paths are boring and flat. I am not capturing that sense of like coziness and wanderlust that I want as I'm moving through this overgrown wood. And I should say as well, as you might say, well, Bryn, just add some art into there, add some bushes and things like that. That's not it. Actually, there's a level design parts that are missing in here. Adding art can always make things better, but it's never going to progress it beyond its initial design. It's just going to mask problems that I really should solve now. However, we're not going to go any further than this right now because there's some major issues that should have prevented me getting beyond my initial flow diagram, beyond all of these little bits we really pieced together here, right? Um, so based on this, based on my initial plan, right, I'm passing it over to you. Can you tell me what issues you see in my plans so far? What problems have I already got in this plan? You were like, you can mention literally anything. I got thick skin. I've been in the games industry for a long time. You can be as brutal as you like. And I know Steve's
And
heard this talk before. He has all the problems.
well, I'm just trying to figure out like it's kind of fun to be able to see what people's like what do you spot, right? Like we're talking about bad levels, and Bryn's intentionally tried to put a couple of problems in here. So it's just a matter of figuring out like what kind of things seem like they might be problematic.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll start talking through them as you folks mentioned them. So Sebastian, it's completely linear. So maybe the player doesn't feel like they have much choice and agency. Yeah, that's true. It's definitely there is not a lot of kind of there isn't a huge amount of kind of decision points in here. That said, there are lots of linear levels that are fantastic, amazing experiences.
What's your
Um,
I'm trying to think like what is a linear level that's fantastic? I mean, I think of all those kinds of rail shooters, right? Where it's pretty much you go this way and just, you know, it's like a ride.
Oh yeah, I mean, like if I wanted to even in this space, right? Think about because if I go back to a lot of this space that we're in, like an action third-person action RPG. A lot of third-person action RPG levels are linear, or generally the script flow is still linear. Um, and some of them are like I don't know, they're going to be like contenders for greatest levels of all time. Um, I can start picking things out. I quite liked a lot of there were lots of levels that stood out to me in the like God of War Ragnarok. Had
Hmm,
some pretty neat little bits in there.
true,
They
true.
do have a bit of back and forth usually where they're kind of running around. And I will say as well, they benefit from having a lot of their levels, whilst linear, have these sort of like bubble moments where it sort of expands out. It feels a
Mhm.
bit more open.
Yeah,
Uh,
like Uncharted, right? Like you have those moments where you're going through like Indiana Jones style, and then you have the ones where you've got the open shootout in a large space.
yeah, yeah, exactly. I'm going to jump to there's some
Hmm.
more pieces in here. Path to the cottage and out of the forest looks exactly the same. Yeah, there's like I think that also it's a point that's alluded to later on, which I'll jump into too, which is about kind of you're doing an out and back. So you have to traverse the same, exactly the same kind of environment going back to that. But also, yeah, like coming out, going from the forest to the witch's cottage and then out, like how much traversal is going on there? How much space do I have to work with? Is there anything interesting to do in the forest? Things like that. There's some issues around there. Um, the Philip says the actual gameplay, the substance of what the player is doing moment to moment, feels a bit weak from the quest start right up to the decision point about the trolls with their cat. Is the player just walking the whole time? Are they doing anything like combat or puzzles or role play? Or are we just hoping that the environment speaks for itself and builds tension? Oh, yeah, we this absolutely. I'm going to jump back to this point in a moment, but this touches on a lot of important problems with this with this level. This is absolutely like, a thumbs up on this one too. Yes, but I want to speak to some of the other points as before we jump into those ones. Yeah, Titanfall 2 is linear but fantastic. Oh, it's almost like you've seen some of the later slides. Titanfall 2 will be coming up momentarily, don't you worry. Um, the player would need to traverse the same path in the area twice. Exactly. We have the quest kind of resolves. Well, the quest could resolve by them going back to the witch. It's not entirely sure if it always resolves by doing that. But yeah, we'd have to come all the way back, and then what are we doing during that? It's kind of boring on there. But yeah, exactly the right point, and actually plays into what we were talking. What Philip had mentioned earlier on about like what are you doing in the level? And then, yeah, is there some sort of walk point or shortcut to get back to the cottage? Again, yeah, that's a solution to the problem. That's something we could put in so that, like, oh, it's going to be really boring to go all the way back. Therefore, I'll give you a fast travel. Yeah, we could do that, couldn't we? But yeah, so coming back to Philip's point, this is the point here, right? Um, if we look at this level, the bulk of the level is this coastal road, this vista, right? There's a huge amount of space that we have to art, that we have to build and make pretty, expansive amount of land that goes out. That's the bulk of the level, but there's no planned content. There's nothing to do. It's the most expensive part of the level to build, and there's no purpose for it existing, right? And obviously, we can put something in there, right? Put combat or something else in there or whatever. But again, like we come back to the quest has no content in the middle, and if we put in combat, like, okay, well then, like, what am I fighting? Am I fighting trolls? Because that's going to make it really awkward at the end of a quest, isn't it? There's also there's a large tonal dissonance here. When I talk about here, the resolutions to the quests are both unsatisfying, especially if I deliver the cat back to the witch and then I go, oh, whoopsie, you made the wrong decision and now the cat dies. Um, like, what am I trying to say with the ending? Because I guess it's kind of, like I'm trolling the player. Hey, I'm trolling the player there. But like, is it funny? Is this kind of a bit of a it's annoying because the player doesn't know that that's going to happen, and now that I've just done a switcheroo on them, I can't. How do I respond? Um, Also, there's a lot of issues I take as well with the overall themes of this. There's a lot of like it's derivative, it's boring. The witch, which I assume to be female as well. The trolls, the ruin on the hill. Okay, I mean these are all super common elements, and there's nothing exciting about their use here. I'm not putting any magic sauce into this to make it something memorable for the player. That's not to say you can't have witches or you can't have trolls. I can talk about lots of missions that make those elements interesting, but I haven't made them interesting here. I've not got any kind of spice to it. Now, this level could ship, right? We could make this, and I could add in some combat. The quest could be massage, we'll come back. We'll have a teleporter and all this kind of stuff, right, to make it better. But I think fundamentally, the quest and the space that it uses are poorly structured to maximize the use of each other. Really, I got attached to two things here, right? I like the twist with the trolls and the cat. That was funny. And I like the visual of the ruin on the cliffs. And everything else in the design, I just kind of shoehorned around those two moments. And if I keep going, I'll just be making ad hoc fixes until the overall design to ensure that those two things stay, even though they're fundamentally not working in my favor. To sum up the point actually that Philip brought up, right? Um, I ignored the premise that I shared with you earlier, right? I designed a space without any knowledge of what the player was going to be doing in it, which makes it a bad level. What am I doing? I'm just telling a funny story. And I probably could have won some people over and be like, yeah, let's do Bryn's level. It's going to be amazing. But it's not. It's going to be boring and rubbish. There's nothing there. Um, oh, yeah, right. Three-phase boss fight. Yeah, see, this is exciting. And there's cat. Oh, the witch's parents are killed by cats. And it's gone too far and she's been taken down. Yes. Yeah, I mean, there could have been a whole twist to that as well. Um, Fundamentally, I'm going to say, right, I'm going to nuke this whole design and I'm going to start again. I'll nuke this whole thing and start again, which isn't to say that I can't use some of the ideas from it. I will say as well, this is extremely common in level design. It's called redesigning things, right? If design is iterative, so it's okay to build something and throw it away and do it again and do it a million times. This is the final time that you do it is going to be awesome at that point, right? You get the get all the pieces coming together and you do it. Again, as I say, I could keep elements of this. Like I like the idea of finding the lost cat and then you discovering that the cat doesn't want to be rescued. Yeah, this is a trope. It's a trope that if I'm trying to be funny around this, I'm trying to like make a little play on here. It's fun. It can be fun there, and there's things I can learn from other uses of that trope. That's fine. Um, I think I need a better way of setting the story up, right? And we want the player to have a satisfying resolution that isn't just murdering things, right? You could murder some things, but you need more than that. We need some meat to this idea. We've got some bookends, right? It's like, oh, I've agreed to find the cat. And then like, oh my God, the cat doesn't want to be found. Hey, that's fun. What happens in between? Like, where's the rest of it? And importantly, like, what tone are we going for? Like, what am I trying to say with the quest? That's very important. Actually, tone is very important, especially when you have something that has more narrative to it. So, the takeaways from this complete madness that we just went through here is always try and evaluate your designs as you go along, right? You think about the player's experience. What is the player doing at this point? What are we going to do? And if something isn't working, you can ditch it, right? You can throw the level away, you can redesign it, you can repatch it. It's a normal part of the design process. As I say, everyone's first level is terrible. It's fine. You learn about how to build a level for your game. That's okay. You have to learn from your rejected ideas, and then you use them to refine later designs. Peer review and feedback is really important here, right? You ask your team, you get your ideas tested, and also once you start to build something, you can start to test it, right? You can get playtest feedback, and then you can playtest with your team and get early feedback and do it often. Find what works. Hopefully, you've seen how the level design can go horribly wrong, right? So, what about good level design? It's more fundamentally, right? Like, is there such a thing as good level design, or is it just personal preference? You can think about like we all have concepts of levels that we enjoyed, and we might not all agree on thinking that one level was the best level or not. But we might have favorites of levels that like this is something that stuck with me, and I always come back to that moment. Um, I always like this quote from Joel Burgess, who I used to work with on Watch Dogs Legion. He was a level designer. He was a level designer on Skyrim. He built a lot of caves, hundreds of caves, and he does a lot of stuff related to level design through GDC and IGDA and such like that. Definitely hit up his talks. But Yeah, one thing he'd said to me, which I always liked, was good level design is when the level design is high-fiving the player. And I think it speaks to the fact that as a level designer, you're not fighting the player. You're not trying to like, I'm gonna kill the player. They're not gonna be able to complete this. No, like you want them to win. You want them to experience the thing that's in your level. Like, this is cool, isn't it? So everything that you're doing is high-fiving them. You want them to feel smart. You want them to enjoy your level and think like, that was awesome. And say that's why you're high-fiving them, right? You provide a structure through which they can feel rewarded through their choices. Okay, so first Titanfall 2 reference we're going into here. And I apologize, I have to use GIFs in here. So this is a GIF, so it's why it's a bit compressed. Horrible loop on here. But honestly, go and like play this game. I think it's on Game Pass. So if you've got Game Pass, you can go play it for free. It's probably like $2 or something if you buy it from somewhere. Um, Into the Abyss is an awesome little linear level. Also, Effect and Cause is another level by Christopher Dion. They're both awesome levels in Titanfall 2. I won't spoiler them too much for you here, but go and play them. There is also a fantastic GDC talk about how this level was developed, which you should totally go and check out too. It's a great narrative build up. It's on rails, but not quite as you might expect. I mean, obviously, you see that you are on a rail here. Um, but even though it's linear, even though it's on rails, it has a great narrative build up and uses the setting to construct kind of interesting navigational challenges for the player, which then highlight the use of Titanfall 2's like awesome movement mechanics, right? It uses all of those mechanics very well while still telling a really evocative, interesting story that builds up. Hey, we talked about it a little bit before. I'm going to mention it again. Did I say that I like the Clockwork Mansion? Yeah, it's pretty awesome. So yeah, Dishonored 2 has a lot of great levels. This is one that stays with a lot of people, and particularly it's like an ode to level design. That is this transforming level that shifts states that the player can go and explore through. It's awesome. I believe there's a Game Maker's Toolkit breakdown about this level too, where they talk to Dana. Also, Dana Nightingale's done a bunch of GDC talks about, I think, level design in obviously working at Arcane Leon, but also she's the campaign director on Deathloop, I believe it was. And there's an awesome talk about the UX in Deathloop and like how they onboard new players into it. That's also really good. Because it does talk about some level design things in there as well. My game of COVID, absolutely, it was just my jam. Because like couch co-op, all about couch co-op. But yeah, It Takes Two was awesome. If you haven't played it, play it. If you it's nice as well if you can want to couch co-op together. Um, it's got loads of awesome levels. If I had to, pick one, I picked Spaced Out. But there's loads of ones that had amazing moments in them. There is a great breakdown of this as well on you can find on YouTube with Game Maker's Toolkit, where they talk about puzzle design in It Takes Two. Um, the the whole game is a really great example of designing for multiple player characters, right? You know what I say about like a level is designed around the player agent and their mechanics. Well, you can have multiple player agents and multiple mechanics all operating at the same time. And this is a great example of it, where you have, Cody's giant and can roll things around and do some things. And May has anti-grav boots and has different ways of interacting with the environment. And so that's how all of these things come together into these levels, into the puzzles in here. Very cool. Um, so, we talk about the level designer's role. First and foremost, you're an advocate for the player. Your relationship is not adversarial. You want the player to exceed. And their design anticipates how the player will choose to play. The best level designers anticipate player strategies and legitimize them, ensuring that they can function in the level instead of forcing a player to follow a specific solution. And like, I'm going to date myself horribly here, but they've done so many talks on this. So there's been so many remakes of this game now. It's fine. You can probably just go and play like a high res version of this game, but there is an awesome talk about this too. A very, very famous level from Call of Duty Modern Warfare called All Gillied Up, which most people have experienced as being this kind of like tense, very narrative driven moment where you're in a ghillie suit and there's an NPC and you're being told to like crawl through this grass and like not shoot people and like, avoid everyone and all this kind of stuff, right? And that's how I guess most people have experienced that level. It's certainly how I did it. But there's a whole other path to the level. If you are one of those people who don't want to listen to, like, oh, go and do this thing. And it's like, no, okay, I'm going to go over there. There's this barn. You find the barn. There's like anti-vehicle rockets. You can go like guns blazing. And you are legitimized to play this level, which is all about being quiet and stealthy, as loud as you want. But it's only if you go off and you're one of those people who wants to go and find that stuff. And it's amazing to know that that whole other path is built there. I never saw it because I'm the sort of player that does what they're told. But that it's in there, right? And because some players don't want to do the stealthy mission. And so it's kind of neat to know that like those things exist and the level designers can legitimize that, right? You can legitimize, you don't just, I'm not going to tell you no, you have to do this mission this one way. It's very cool. Okay, so like jumping back into It Takes Two, right? In that sequence with Spaced Out, you can see how there's a visual design language that tries to communicate the bounds of where the player can go, right? It is just physical space, kind of these like visual sort of design aids that mean that we don't have to tell the player where they can and can't go. They can interpret it here. So the walls, which I've highlighted in red, right? You see these little things, they've got these nuggets on there. They prevent the ball from rolling over them, right? And you can see, you need to be able to see over it because you need to know that the path is going to go that way, right? And these glass tiles, which are in green, are used to show the path that the players are meant to take, right? There's a break here. It shows that I can't go that way. And what's important here is you can see then that the far wall. Oh no, I really need like my laser pointer or something, right? You can see, yeah, sure, laser pointer. This far wall over here, that's green as well. That's sorry, it's see-through tile as well, right? And that's to demonstrate that May, who has this anti-grav power, can go up there. That's the way that you are supposed to go as May. Now, like I'd say the language is kind of clear here, but these walls are fairly shallow. And I did think I could maybe roll the ball over them the first time I played, even though obviously I know that that's not the way I'm supposed to go. And it doesn't read that I clearly couldn't do that. So maybe this could have needed some improvement on there. Um, uh, Oh, yeah. Laurent talking about his talk in GDC about the tutorial in Splinter Cell. Yeah, no, it's awesome. I haven't actually seen that talk. I am going to go and look at it. I have only had the pleasure of working with Laurent for on a couple of small moments on projects, but he's a very lovely guy, and was great to work with. Um, I feel bad now though, because I might do some Ubi bashing, but only in the sense of like player communication. I talk about that, right? And you do find a lot of games. It's not just Ubisoft. There's a lot of other people who are doing this. There's a big push within games to try and standardize visual language to communicate simple ideas, right? Like what's dangerous, what can I interact with? Um, I find like some games, particularly of an age, went a bit to the extreme with this, particularly in AAA open world games, right? It was a difficult problem to handle. It seems like there was this big summit a few years back, and then everyone suddenly decided that yellow was climbable. Yeah, or yellow was interaction, right? Far Cry, Horizon Zero Dawn, all those things were doing this. Um, a lot of games started leveraging that too. It's not because like everyone there was some secret, meeting and they all went like, yes, let's make it yellow. Everything must be yellow from now on. But more so, actually, a point that we're going to talk about later on, which is about utilizing existing design paradigms so that people don't have to learn too much new things or be in contrast to new things that they're going to find in your game. Um, this like color being used for different things, it is a bit extremely used in Far Cry, at least in the last one. There's very heavy-handed approach of like red is the bad people, blue is good. And I think some of the subtlety, the lack of subtlety, I should say, sorry, I think acts to its detriment. Like I don't feel smart for recognizing that I'm in a friendly area because everything's blue. It feels like it's really obvious and it kind of detracts from some of the experience, at least in my opinion. Uh, yeah, that's it, right? There's a lot of things like a lot of different games do this in different ways. Um, so good level design then, right? Like what is good level design? Well, ultimately it gives the player enough information to make their own action evaluations. This is, if we talk about Don Norman's, design of everyday things and other works there, making things visible. It's about you being able to have enough information to make a choice about how to act. It employs the careful use of constraints, right? Like we want players to evaluate a smaller set of variables that understand the relationships to each other and then execute their actions based on what they understand. But we also need to support users who are learning how the level or the game operates, whilst ensuring that we don't gate expert players. And it's funny, you've seen this a lot actually with how mission design has evolved in throughout the years, right? Like it back in the day, go if there's a mission, go and see so and so, and then come back to me. Go and get the key or whatever, right? Well, like 9 times out of 10 now, those missions account for the fact that you've already done that, and you already have the key. That kind of stuff makes the logic for building that mission more complicated. But it's nicer because you can preempt these things. It also means that players can enter quest flows from multiple vantage points, which makes it very interesting. So, good level design, really, I would say, is it follows a good application of theory. If we look at the relationship between the level designer, their intent, and the level itself, and the player, we kind of find like we're describing Don Norman's three conceptual models. If you've read the Design of Everyday Things or Emotional Design, you would have come across this. If you haven't read those, go and read them. They're great. But the classic for a reason. So the level designer, right, strives to have the user, who in this case is the player, form their conceptual model of how the level or the mission works, matching the original level design intent. Right, so we saw this in the previous section employed in our examples. So when we look at level design, and specifically, we're just going to focus for a moment on environmental design, because mission design has all sorts of other things in there too. We can apply these design concepts more specifically to break this down into the set of skills shown above, which we're going to go over in more detail now. So layout is how the key elements of your level are arranged and the metrics that govern how it's shaped, right? A level is a functional space, first and foremost, but it also needs to make sense. If you're building a human space, like a house or a street or a city, the player needs to get the impression that the level has existing functions outside of the game's use. On the left is actually a great GDC talk on the level design of Gone Home, and there's links at the end that I'll provide on here. On the right, I've shown a map of Watch Dogs London, Watch Dogs Legion London, which is superimposed over actual London. Now, the world design still evokes the feeling of the real city, but it's very different structurally. It's not London. I've spent many years in London, and I can tell you, there are lots of things that have been trimmed from there. It is trimmed down to an idea of a London that people can still understand is London. They can still recognize, but which suits the game. And so it is the Watch Dogs Legion's version of London, where some things are more important than others. Some things are faded into the background. Some things are removed from London entirely because they're not needed for the game. And below as well, yeah, we have all of this stuff. We talk about metrics from before. I have this little thing, the climbing dead zone. This is a metric from actually from the Watch Dogs games in general, where the player can, the mechanics of how the player works, right? You can climb something up to 3 meters high, but no higher, right? You can't read from a distance that something is just over 3 meters high, right? So if I need to tell the player this thing is not climbable, then I need to have some sort of dead zone that enforces, hey, like someone's not going to be able to read this at a distance. So if I need to make it unclimbable, I need it to read as such, we should make it 5 meters. And also, we should make it 5 meters. And in most cases, we make it 5 meters and it uses a special mesh. Like it's a particularly, it's got barbed wire on it or something like that, right? That oh, right, I can't climb that. And as I said, metrics, investigations, kind of lean into layout and such as well. Uh, the rate and intensity at which the player encounters content in the level is called pacing, and it's crucial to ensure that a player doesn't get too bored or too frustrated, right? You see this whole like threading that needle between anxiety and boredom. Points of low intensity are best to teach a new mechanic or deliver story content to the player because you'll have more of their attention. The graph at the bottom here is actually one of the things that come from Splinter Cell Blacklist. And I like this as one of the sort of planning mechanisms they're using that traces story and combat intensity as it is supposed to change through each beat of the level. So you can see here, if I need to have more of a story beat here, I need to be able to tell someone something, or there's some narrative content that's going to be very heavy there, then it's going to be a point of low intensity. And this kind of goes up and down as the excitement of that game changes as you go through the level. The circulation, we mentioned this earlier on, it's a term used in architecture to describe the routes that people take through spaces and the perceived speed of travel based on the metrics of that space, right? Closed spaces typically feel faster to travel through than open ones. Now, as a level designer, I have a great amount of control over where the player can and can't go. And so influencing the player's choices subtly and providing them with options that allow them to feel that they are making their own choices should always be the goal of mine. On the left here, actually just showing a heat map of like from an actual level, the routes through which people take going through there. And I believe this is a multiplayer map. I can remember the specific map. I used to have this called out on here, but I don't. It might be it's going to be something multiplayer related on there, but I have to come back to that. Foreshadowing. Um, like usually foreshadowing, we know about foreshadowing being used in a narrative context. And you mentioned about everything I learned about level design. I learned from Disneyland, which talks about weenies, right? Oh, I see this thing in the distance. Zelda and many other games having something that you can see on the horizon that you want to aim for, right? Um, but there's a lot of gameplay applications for foreshadowing and such too, right? If I think about Far Cry does this a lot, right? Far Cry is built into the design of assaulting a base or an area in Far Cry are vantage points where I can get a sense of the layout of the base, see the patrol routes, and I can start to plan my strategy of how I'm going to go and assault that area. It's just part of the design language about how they build their spaces in there. Similarly, if we think about like a rhythm action game, right? The game track allows me to anticipate when I need to react. You could also draw similar conclusions with the amount of screen crop that I have in a platformer, in a 2D platformer running about, or like an infinite runner or something like that, right? You are feeding the player information that they need in order to evaluate the future actions. And whilst a lot of narrative content is delivered to the player via speech or text, environmental storytelling is still a powerful part of it. We use signs, cultural symbols, compounded ideas, and the player draws their own conclusions about what these places are. And this can also obviously overlap with foreshadowing too. On the right, if you must have played by now Elden Ring. This is a scene here. And this view is pretty much the first moment that the player emerges from their kind of starting area, of having cleared the first starting boss. And I merge into what is the rest of the game, right? Or at least the rest of the game in this moment. There's some more I have to get to later on, but you see beyond lie all these challenges ahead of me that I've yet to conquer, and I start marking out the Erd trees that I have to get to and reclaim in the coming trials. Um, Existing player knowledge. Oh, my favorite part. So as I alluded to this earlier on, right? Like, firstly, players of your game have already got preconceived ideas of how things work in games, right? They play lots of games. We all play games, and things work in different games in certain ways. Red barrels are a very classic example here, since it's a design trope that has been used so much, it is often extremely difficult to subvert. And I always like to mention this one because there was a mini talk at some point from PCF. It was on Bulletstorm, where they talk about trying to make their attempts to make exploding barrels yellow in Bulletstorm and failing because no one understood in playtests how the exploding barrels worked. They did not know that a yellow barrel would explode, whereas if they made it red, everyone knew exploding barrel. And I know it's terrible, it's a horrible trope, exploding barrels, but it's also something that you don't need to teach anyone, which is nice. Um, I say like this is something that game designers have to deal with a lot, right? Let's give an example, right? Drivable vehicles. If you have a drivable vehicle in your game, then it means contending with the existing control schemes and then having to find ways to fit your game's design to paradigms that other people are already using, whilst also supporting your own mechanics. And you'll have this impact on your games as you choose traditional control schemes, or if you represent human recognizable objects, right? Like can the players jump, or like are there doors? Can the player open doors in your game? And if not, why not? How do you communicate that to people? In a lot of games, right, designers will use implicit social cues from the real world to guide players to understand how the game functions. The Hitman games are a great idea of this, right? They rely on designing clearly explicit public and private spaces where the player can identify how to bypass them by means of understanding the narrative of the space and role playing the appropriate character to do so. Unpacking relies a lot on this too, actually, right? It leveraging the player's familiarity with human objects in order to understand and explore the limitations of their placement. However, this can become a trap, right? You think like, oh yeah, it's easy. People understand that that thing means this. Okay, maybe I assume in Hitman that this type of character should be able to enter this area. But then I put on that outfit and they can't, and it's not clear to me why they can't. Or the issue I've run into in unpacking, where like this particular object in unpacking should be stackable but isn't. Why isn't it? And it's just not clear to me why it isn't. That's when the reliance on saying, well, people will know this from the real world, those sorts of cues can grate against the player. Because then it seems obvious that they should be able to do something, but they can't. Sometimes, though, right, you have to be heavy handed in order to convey to the player a shift in design paradigm. The most classic example that I like to try out every year of this is the first Metroid, which is in 1986. Um, and I used to end up, we used to go through this slide by slide, but through the magic that is retrogames.cc, I am going to, I'm going to try. Oh, wait, is this coming through? Oh, no, this is what happened last time. It is presenting. I am sharing that. Am I sharing
I
the?
can see it. I
You
think
can see it? Okay, right.
you shared your screen so we can see it.
Yes, awesome. All right, so now I'm going to come back to here, full screen. I can unmute the site as well, actually, if we want, so we can hear. I turned the volume down because the sound's really grating. Oh no, no, I don't want this. Go away. All right, we'll just play it in a tiny window. All right, start.
When you choose a game that probably nobody was alive to see.
Yeah, it's almost as old as I am. All right, so there's an important context when I start here. We at the start of the game, Samus Aran. Apparently, that is how it's pronounced. I've been saying it wrong so many years. Samus is facing us, right? This is important. She is stood in the center of the screen facing us, and this is important because we go back to around the time this came out. We had Mario, and Mario stood on the left side of the screen, and he faced right. But Samus doesn't do this. She faces towards us. Um, this is important. But that's all right. We're going to ignore this. I'm like some Mario playing heathen. I've got no idea what this game is like, so I'm going to run right like Mario does. Okay, so we're going to go right. Yeah, cool. I'm going to have to get good and not die like I did earlier. So I have you. No, no. All right. I'm not. Yep. Didn't get stuck by that dude. It's a shame because I only play Metroid once a year, and only this tiny portion of the game. No, don't die. Yeah. All right. Get that. Cool. Take this thing. No. All right. This is important. So I went all the way right, right? And now I'm like, great. I'm stuck. There's a hole. I can't go through the hole. I can't crouch. I'm mashing the keyboard. I'm rubbish. This sucks. I was about to take the game back to Blockbuster or ask, my parents to take it back to the store, but it's all right. Oh my God, no. So I'm gonna shoot these things. I'm gonna have to go all the way back left because remember, there were some things left, and you have to bear with me whilst. Oh no, apparently I am about to die. Bryn, get good. All right. Yeah. Okay. I'm gonna let this dude go over there. There we go. So try and crawl through this space. All right. So I go left, and I can go left in this game. It's not Mario. Cool. I climb in here. I can't get in through the bottom, but I can climb in here. Um, okay, well, I'm not going to collect the glowy orb thing that looks really obvious. So, okay, I can't get out of this area. What the hell? This sucks. What is wrong with this game? Who made this like area that I can't escape from? I'm going to go left. And I can't do anything. Great. So I have to hit this ball. All right, great. Forget it. Ooh, magical sound. Something happened. Uh, so now if I hit down, oh, I turn into a ball. Obviously, everyone knew that. Yeah, like Brian, what the hell? We all know that Metroid can do that. Um, so now we know that we can go all the way right, and I can continue. I can go through the little tunnel. I can go off, and I can do all these magical things that you can do in Metroid, right? Um, right. So the point is all of that. I didn't get a pop up and some text telling me to do any of this stupid stuff. Right? It was all level design. It was all constraints that taught me. And okay, like sounds facing and being in the middle of the screen, all that kind of stuff. But we all just got taught that Metroid is a game where, right, I can go in any direction, where I might come across a dead end, right, and I can't get through it, but there's something I can find somewhere else in the level that will give me the ability to do so. And I just have to find them. And lo and behold, on this day, Metroidvania was born. Um, so yeah, it's important to like utilize constraints, and you can be heavy-handed like Metroid was if you need to communicate something that, hey, it's totally different this way. It's not Mario. That's cool. Slightly more modern version of this. Well, I like to trot this one out. And hey, they remade Demon Souls to be nicer graphics or whatever, so it's good. I get to use this one again. The Demon Souls had the tutorial boss, the Vanguard Demon. You have to fight in this tiny, inescapable room, and then yeah, there's a couple of ways you could cheat kill him the first time, and then well, they just spawn an invulnerable one, and then you're kind of stuck, and what the hell? And I know the idea of like an inescapable, unwinnable fight doesn't sound very fun, right? It's not something that you would intentionally put into your game, but it was crucial in putting into redefining the player's understanding of how Demon Souls works, because Demon Souls is different, right? In this game, and learn in all of the Dark Souls games that followed, it's okay to die. Like, you don't switch the game off or try and reload when you die, because death isn't the end. And in fact, in Demon Souls, it's a whole other state of the game that interacts with lots of the mechanics and such, right? So, summarizing some of this stuff, uh, the players of your games have already got preconceived ideas of how things work in games. Red barrels is the classic example here, and it's just a design trope that it's been used so much. It's often very difficult to subvert. Um, and if your game obviously functions in a very different way than the player might be expecting, then you may need to be heavy handed in breaking their preconceptions of how certain things work in games. And that's okay to do. You can do that. I got a bunch of links and things and stuff. There's, Google Blocktober, check out things on whatever, social media related bits you got. There's loads of awesome GDC talks on the GDC Vault about level design and new ones coming out every year. It's always a good time. Thank you very much. And I'll open it up to questions.
Yep. Mm. So thank you, Bryn. Um, yeah, so this was the quick tour of all things related to level design. Does anyone have
Mm.
anything you want to kind of ask about, especially related to your game in particular? Bryn, we got a whole bunch this year. We've got everything from kind of like cozy games, horror games, puzzle games, action games. We got a whole bunch. Um, we got games about octopi. We got games about drones. Um, so I don't know. I'm trying to think. I'll give people another few seconds to be able to ask something. You can feel free to say it if you want. Just put up your hand if you want, or yay, Philip.
Thank you. Thank you for the talk, Bryn. I wanted to ask that sort of model you use of sort of designing levels based on a flow chart first before actually taking it to a real geometric world. Do you think that design philosophy works also for kind of more open worlds as opposed to ones that are not linear, but where there's a defined start and end? Because our project is going to be a lot more of a space where the player can kind of start anywhere and do things in any order. Do you think that system still works for that, or is there a different way that we should be approaching that?
Yes, good question. So I know I kind of pushed aside open world design at one point. You could approach it like that, especially if you are looking at, say, and it can really be any sort of like thematic choice or kind of like, how am I trying to say this? Like content size chunk that you want to look at. Like, let's imagine, oh, I'm trying to say where my biomes are going to be or something like that, or how these things are structured. Um, then having an idea of what leads into what is useful, and also having an idea of like, um, yeah, let's say how someone might be able to move through one section into another. Because there's usually something that binds an area together, right? There's something that indicates the player that I've moved and I've got into a new area now. I'm in a defined space. Um, there's be it a biomes are classic sort of delineation there of like, oh, I've moved from this type of area to this type of area, and there's a kind of a clear like boundary line that I'm crossing there. But also it might be something smaller, like this is it's a dungeon or it's a POI. Oh, I'm saying
Oh,
three letter acronyms. It's a place of interest or something like that that is marked out there. So I think it could still be useful. What I'd say is what it will give you answers to is whether or not you have how things connect together, what things relate to each other, and whether or not you have enough content to fill out the space that you're planning out. If you look at something and you're like, I've got like five things and I've got this bigger space that I'm trying to fill, maybe I need more things, or maybe I need a smaller space.
I
Which is a
think,
good thing to answer when you're in a planning stage, right?
I think back to things like GTA, where it used to have some sections of the island. There's a bridge to get over there, and the bridge is under construction until you've completed a certain mission. Right. So even if it's open world, within the open world, there's still certain checkpoints, right? Things that you need to do that have to be done in a certain order before certain parts of the world are unlocked. Or even like Breath of the Wild, right? Like you would have to get the hang glider before you can start doing some of the things like, jumping off of the
Yeah.
tall towers. So it's like open world, but within the open world, there's still this idea of like a structure or a flow or like a set of events that you've kind of scripted.
Oh yes, I now thinking about Skyrim. There's a good talk about their tutorial area. Right, like it's an open world thing. You can walk out of there, right? You don't have to stay there, but it's a section of world that is designed to be like your introductory area that has a couple of little bits and pieces. And as you start to leave there, there are sort of specific routes that people will probably take. And therefore, then the content around those areas tends to be scaled up like that, right? Because whilst it's not linear, the kind of you know where the player starts from, and you know the likelihood of the player being able to get to a certain other area. Because you do have to account for these things where it's like, I started the game, I took a wrong turn, and now I'm stuck.
Mhm.
You know, there's that sort of harsh edge on there where it's like, actually, I'm starting to have a lot of bad experience with this game. But you're also right that like it's okay. You don't necessarily have to fence everyone in and go like, right, you can never get to that area. You can't get to the last end game boss and do this because that might also be too harsh an edge. You can account for someone getting somewhere. There's an excitement going somewhere where you feel like you're not supposed to go and being like, I'm out of my depth here. Like maybe I can come back to this later on. But yeah, it's a balancing act, right?
All right, Kachik.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yep.
Oh,
Uh, Thank you again for the talk. Very informative. I had a question that's specific to the game I'm working on, which is very sort of quickly, very high level. It's sort of like a rhythm game that's also like inspired by like sort of endless runners, that type of gameplay that takes place inside of a heart. And the question I had was how to approach level design um, in a way that sort of if the different levels are all taking place like within the same setting, like perhaps you're running through the veins of the heart, perhaps the environment isn't going to be drastically different level from level. How can we approach designing sort of different sections with different kinds of interactions so that the game doesn't feel too static?
that's the core of it there, right? It's what are the different things that the player is going to be doing, um, such that like if the thematics aren't different, although I would even say there, right, like even though you say it's in the same environment, there are ways to be able to embellish the environment being different or having some element of progression in there even if you're supposed to still be running through veins. I don't know, like maybe you get into like different parts of the arteries, or you're going through capillaries at one point, or you go through like, there are parts where you're going through actual kind of valves or things like that. There are moments that you can use there, but that aside, let's say for instance you don't do any of that. You're like, no, Bren, it's gonna look exactly the same in every level. Okay, then what are the interactions that the player does? Um, and like, do I that you end up with a set of things that the player does, right? Kind of, I've got. I don't know. I'm saying if it's like a rhythm action game, and but it's an endless runner, there's going to be like a, I don't know. Let's say there's a jump, right? And you're jumping a gap, and you're trying to jump a gap and do a thing, and then you can jump a gap and collect a thing as you're crossing the gap, or you can jump a gap and you're not necessarily trying to jump the gap per se. You're trying to jump to reach a particular type of area, and there's something that's going to happen there. Like you start moving differently, or there's reaction from the game, whatever. Um, all these sorts of little things, all these little pieces that you're going to piece together. Then the level design that you will try and approach is trying to create like phrases of things, of interactions, right? Like sequences of things that you're like, that was a particularly interesting or pleasing sequence that you could put together there. And it means that, uh, like, let's be clear as well. This isn't something that I mentioned in the talk, but I really should mention that, like, you probably don't want to start by trying to make level 1-1 as your first level,
Mhm.
because making your first level or making the tutorial level, making the level that you think is the simplest level for a player to onboard through, is something that you will undoubtedly learn through the process of making levels for your game, right? You will go, by the time that you have all of your mechanics and you understand your game, is the best time when you can go, how do I onboard someone to learn about how my game works? What are the things that I build them up to? Because once you've got all your mechanics, it's easy to go, here's all of the things together, right? You're going to become, the more that you play your game, you're going to become the best player at your game ever. Sort of, maybe, you know. But like you undoubtedly, like the skill level of people playing the game every day, which you should be doing, will inevitably lead you to not be a good example player who comes in who is, you know, I've never played this game before. Because you understand, oh yeah, well, this is how the jump works. Oh, actually, this is the distance of the thing. And so you develop that muscle memory. You have an implicit way, you know that you have to turn left in this thing, right? All that kind of stuff. So you're not a very good example new player. But it means then that you get good at building complex sequences of putting your mechanics together that are pleasing, that are, you know, like this, oh yeah, this is a really good thing. I think this was a really neat part of this level. And you can start putting these different bits together and go, maybe actually this bit that I did in this level and this bit that I did over here, those levels didn't work on their own, but combining those two bits together into a new level, it's actually kind of cool. Let's do that. And then you work backwards and go, all right, like now we've got all the pieces. What's the mechanic I'm going to start with to get people into like understanding the basics of how my game works? And then you can start building your first level out of that. But yeah, it's again, like you might go, well, I built the first level of our level and everyone thought it was perfect. And that was great. That's good. It just typically, a lot of things don't work like that sometimes, especially when you've got new mechanics, right? You're trying to, if a lot of your game is kind of like someone jumps into it and it's like, yeah, I know how this works, and it's kind of easy to jump in there. That's one thing. But if you're breaking design paradigms, like, oh, well, in my game, actually, the character doesn't walk. They're like made of jello and they have to bounce off of things. And you're like, all right, well, I probably have to learn how that works for a little bit before you throw in like, oh, and here there's this 20 different weapons and all of these other things, and there's these enemies that if you didn't watch and they were doing this thing, then you're gonna die. Yeah, you need to like build that stuff up.
All right.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
So just out of consideration for your time, I'm just going to say I've issued you an invite to our Discord so that if people
Ooh.
have some further questions, then they can pass them on to you there. But in the meantime, I just wanted to say thank you very much for being here and for sharing your time and your expertise with everyone. This was great, and I guess yeah, we'll have an opportunity to talk a little more about this. But for those of you who are here, just try to keep these lessons in mind for next week, because next week you have to do your presentations on your design doc, which include your characters and levels. Try to remember all the things that are going in here about using your mechanics in order to inform your level design. And yeah, and we'll see each other again on Thursday when we talk about what the design presentation's like.